A galette is a really fancy looking pastry that's actually incredibly simple. It's made out of pie dough and fruits, and it offers all of the flavor of a really delicious summer fruit pie, but with a lot less work. It's something that you kind of throw together on a sheet pan and bake and have ready in just a few hours. So I'm gonna show you how to make one of my favorites, my honeyed plum galette. If you want to try something other than plum, you can follow my recipe exactly and just use any stone fruit that's your favorite. Let's get started. In the bowl of my food processor, I'm going to combine 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour with 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar and 3/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. Both of these are important in balancing the flavor of the dough, and the sugar also helps the dough brown as it bakes, so you get a really wonderfully browned and crisp pastry dough. I'm just gonna pulse to combine these. All right, and now to this, I'm going to add 1 full stick of butter, so 8 tablespoons of butter, that I've cubed into about 1-inch cubes, and I put in the freezer for a few minutes just to make sure it's extra cold. When you're making dough like this, working with really cold fats is really important to making a crispy and airy pastry dough. And then here I have 3 tablespoons of vegetable shortening. I also place this vegetable shortening in the freezer, so it's also very cold. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pulse this about 10 times. What I'm looking for is for the butter pieces to resemble really small pebbles. Kind of think like the pebbles at the bottom of a fish tank or something. You want pieces that are really small but still whole and intact. This is exactly what you're looking for. Pieces that are about this size, and everything is well incorporated with no big lumps remaining in the flour mixture. Now I'm going to take my dry ingredients here and just dump them into a bowl. The recipe tells you that you can do this in the food processor, and that's absolutely true. I've just found that I've gotten a flakier, more layered pastry dough if I do this part in a bowl by hand. So right here I've got 5 tablespoons of ice water, and at first you're gonna add 4 tablespoons or 1/4 cup. And so just add that right into these ingredients. And we've got the reserved other tablespoon right here. And then I just like to combine it with my hands. It's gonna take a few minutes. Flour takes a little while to absorb moisture. So it takes a few seconds for it to kind of become a dough, but then once dough clumps start to form, I'm going to stack them on my table. And by stacking these clumps of dough, I ensure that within the pastry dough, I have a bunch of flaky separated layers that as the galette bakes, they'll puff in between and make a really crisp, delicious crust. Pieces that naturally clump together, just pull them out and start making your pile. And now would be the time to add the additional tablespoon of ice water. Depending on the flour you use, you might find that you don't need that additional tablespoon, and so the 4 will be just enough. If you look closely, you can see these little pieces of butter that are still kind of strewn throughout the dough. That's a really good thing. That will help make the pastry really flaky. So I'm now going to press this into a 1-inch thick disc, wrap it in some plastic wrap, and pop it in the fridge for at least an hour. It's okay if your dough is a little crumbly. As the dough hydrates more in the fridge, it will become more uniform in texture. To make the filling for this galette, all you need is 1.5 pounds of fresh, ripe plums, some honey, some lemon juice, some cornstarch, a little cardamom and salt, and then some ginger snap crumbs, which I'll get to in a moment. However, the first thing we need to do is cut our plums into about 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick segments and place them in a bowl. And to these plums, I'm gonna add the rest of the filling ingredients. So first, 2 tablespoons of honey. Stone fruit-like plums have a really rich, deep kind of a sweetness, and I found that this is complemented by something like honey, which has a similar rich sweetness, different than the simple sweet of, say, granulated sugar. 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, which is just gonna brighten up the filling. And then right here I have a mixture of 1/8 teaspoon of kosher salts and 1/4 teaspoon of ground cardamom. Cardamom is one of the fruitier tasting spices. Some people say it kind of reminds them of Fruit Loops. It has that really tropical, tangy sort of flavor for a spice, which is kind of unique. And then right here I have 1 teaspoon of cornstarch. This is gonna cause all of the liquids that come out of the plums as they bake and as the sugar and the honey draws them out to set and become kind of like a gel, which is perfect in a galette or a pie. So we're just gonna combine these ingredients, just stirring to coat all of the plum pieces and all of these delicious flavorings. You'll notice I haven't used the 1/3 cup of ginger snap crumbs yet, and I will show you why in a moment. I have my pie dough right here, and so I'm going to generously flour my work surface, flour it again, and just gently press down. And then I'm going to flour and use my rolling pin to roll this out into a 1/8 of an inch thick circle. You want this to be as circular as possible because that's going to determine the final shape of the galette. However, the good news about a galette is that it's not supposed to be fussy. So if it's a little lopsided, the shape's a little different than a circle, it's perfectly fine. I'm now just gonna use a paring knife to cut off the jagged edge around the circle of my pie dough. This is purely for aesthetics and the look of the galette. If you don't mind having a jagged edge, then don't even feel the need to do this. And now I'm going to transfer it to my baking sheet. So I'm simply going to fold it in half and then fold it in half again to make this little envelope of dough that makes it easy to transfer to my baking sheet. I'm going to put it on my baking sheet and then I'm going to unfold it. Now that we have our dough on our baking sheet, we're going to pile all of our plums onto the dough, but first we're going to use the 1/3 cup of crushed ginger snap crumbs. I simply bought some ginger snaps at the grocery store and blitzed them in my food processor. Graham cracker crumbs are just as good if you don't have access to ginger snaps. I do love the flavor of ginger with plum, which is why I'm leaning more towards the ginger snaps than I am with the graham crackers in this recipe. But you're just going to sprinkle this down, leaving about a 2-inch margin all the way around the circle. The purpose of this, in addition to flavoring the galette, is that these crumbs are also going to soak up some of the juices of the plums and prevent the bottom of the crust from becoming soggy. And any of the remaining juices in your bowl, just pour over the plums, and then pick up each edge of the dough and gently fold it over the fruit, bending it to make these little creases so that you're making a pocket of this spiced, rich, honeyed fruit inside the pastry dough. Once you've done that, if you find that your dough is just a little bit too soft, you can pop it in the freezer for a few minutes to firm it back up right before baking. I popped my galette in the freezer for 20 minutes and my oven is preheated to 425, so we're almost ready to bake. The first thing I need to do before I throw it in the oven is brush the surface of the dough with some whole milk. You can even use water if you need to. It's just to make the raw sugar that we're going to sprinkle on the pastry stick to the pastry. If you want to use egg wash, that's also an option. Whatever you have on hand. This is going to bake at 425 for about 25 minutes. You're just looking for the bottom of the pastry to be well browned and for the fruit to be softened and bubbling in its own juices. My galette has cooled off completely, so it's down to room temperature. It smells incredible, kind of like honey and a little bit of spice. I took the liberty of drizzling it with some more honey right when it came out of the oven so that it would kind of spread and melt and soak and coat the entire surface of the galette. And now I'm gonna cut myself a slice. You can see that the liquid is still a little runny, but it's pretty jammy. It's not running out of the galette slice. And that the pieces of plum are still entirely intact. They haven't broken down, they've just softened. My spoon kind of struggled a little bit to break through the crust at the bottom, which is what you want with the galette. That means that the bottom layer of pastry is fully baked through. And if you look at it, you can see that it's well browned and it's not underbaked or raw. It's a truly exceptional dessert for the summer or the fall. The plum slices are still juicy, but they're kind of enhanced by the spice of the cardamom and then the sweetness and syrupiness of honey and the flavor of honey. And then the pastry itself is crisp, but that perimeter that we coated in raw sugar has become kind of crunchy from the raw sugar bits melting a little bit in the heat of the oven and then re-solidifying as they cool. There's a very subtle ginger flavor that's coming from the ginger snaps. Altogether, this is a fancy looking dessert that is not difficult to make. In fact, it's easier than a fruit pie. If you've enjoyed what you've seen today, subscribe to the Southern Living YouTube channel, where you're sure to find other videos like this one that we know you'll enjoy. Thanks, see you next time.